Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, COVID-19 and its impact on income tax regime in India, organized by School of Law, Ansal University. My name is Professor Vidushi Puri, Program Director, LLB Honors, School of Law, Ansal University. Before we start, let me explain how you can talk to us during the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, just write them in the chat box. Kindly turn off your cameras and keep your microphones muted for the entirety of the session. Do not tamper with the functions of the platform for smooth and uninterrupted session. Ansal University was established in 2012 under the Haryana Private Universities Act 2006, located in the Millennium City of Gurugram. Ansal University has been awarded National Education Excellence Award, Best Private University in Northern India 2017, along with CSR Excellence in Education Award for 2 consecutive years, that is 2017 and 18. We have 8 schools offering programs in architecture, design, and law, etc. We are a university with the core ideology of being futuristic with the mission ahead for life. The curriculum design is guided by inter- and transdisciplinary approach, incorporating pedagogies that expand learning opportunities, ensuring higher order learning outcomes. School of Law, Ansal University is one of the flagship schools which was established in 2014 to impart quality legal education and intending to produce world-class professionals, scholars and academicians in law. School of Law, Ansal University has been ranked number 1 in the category of most promising law school in India by GHRDC 2019 survey. The school has been conferred with numerous awards for academic excellence for 4 consecutive years by Knowledge Teas, Legal Desire, GHRDC, and INBA. It's a top-notch institution with outstanding credentials committed to the cause of excellence in legal education. The school has faculty members from some of the best global and national institutes. School of Law seeks to impart cutting-edge knowledge to the future attorneys of tomorrow. The school lays emphasis on clinical legal education, keeping up with its motto, learning by experiencing. The school has also adopted virtual mode of learning for its students to promote qualitative learning, teaching, research in the times of COVID-19. School of Law offers 5 years BA LLB and BB LLB honors and also offers LLB honors 3 years, 1 year LLM and also PhD program. Over to you, Professor Arushi.
Good evening, everyone. I am Professor Arushi Mehta, Program Director, BBA LLB Honors, and I, along with Professor Vidushi, will be your moderators for the evening. Today, we have an amazing panel on COVID-19 and its impact on the income tax regime in India, where we will be discussing and deliberating upon various issues relating to it and how it has an impact on the Indian economy. Before I go ahead and introduce our first panelist, I would like to inform all of you as to how we shall proceed. We will be taking up our panelists one by one, wherein they will be deliberating and sharing their views. The audience is requested to post their queries and questions in the chat box, which we will address towards the end of the webinar. Our first panelist for today is Dr. Manoj Kumar Singh, who is an Associate Professor at National Law University, Jodhpur. Sir has a teaching experience of 14 years at NLU Jodhpur in the field of taxation. He is a postgraduate in law from Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, and has professional experience as a lawyer for 2 years. He has attended workshops and conferences at various levels in relation to IPR and taxation. His areas of interest include taxation and commercial laws. He is also serving as an Executive Director, Center for Tax Laws. He has published papers at various issues relating to taxation in the journals of national and international repute. Sir has also done his doctorate from National University, Jodhpur on the topic Double Taxation, Problem and Prospects, a study with special reference to permanent establishment. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, to begin with the session, I would first want you to give us a brief insight into the income tax regime which is existing in India and help us understand the recent concepts with respect to the taxation regime we have in India, like digital tax and all.
Okay. Thank you, Arushi and Vidushi, for inviting me for this interesting discussion on the Income Tax Act and the situation of COVID-19. Uh, this this issue has been which has been given to me to speak on that basics of Income Tax Act. Basically, it's a very you see deliberate and very important discussion on that what is Income Tax Act at all together. Now there are certain W's everyone has to know before starting the Income Tax Act. Like first is that what is that why this tax at all together. So, like if you look into the definition of tax, I am not going there. There is no definition of tax. What we call it characteristics of tax. Just like someone asks you that define the elephant. Okay, so you can't define the elephant. Okay, you can tell that elephant has long legs and all these things they have. Okay, with nose and all these things. So there is a characteristics. We can't define the tax at all. If you look into the ancient definition of tax and the modern definition of tax, there are so many different arguments on that. But I tell you the one judgment of the Supreme Court, which is the Justice the Venkat Subba Rao versus the state of Andhra Pradesh, where the Supreme Court has decided what is tax at all. And the Supreme Court said that the levy will not constitute tax unless it is a compulsory extraction. So what is tax? A tax is an imposition made by public purpose without reference to any services rendered by the state or any specific benefit. So there is no quid pro quo element in that. So we can't demand anything for the tax. Of course, the definition of tax from the Chanakya Arthasastra is different from what Supreme Court said in the Venkat Rao case. Because Chanakya has said that if the king has failed to perform his duty or king has failed to provide any services to the subject, then subject should not pay the taxes. Okay, but right now we can't say that to the government that okay, if you fail to perform your duty, we should not pay the tax. So that is not possible right now. If you look into the one American court judgment on that what is tax, then it says taxation, its the broadest and most general sense, includes every charge or burden imposed by sovereign power upon person, property, or property rights. So basically, that they talked about the tax on including everything. It's like a person, property rights, transactions, etc. So we have different kind of taxation system like the direct or indirect. Okay, nowhere it is defined what is direct, what is indirect. Only thing is that it depends on that the way the government want to tax is it direct or indirect. So if it is directly on the person property, we call it direct. If it is indirectly on the person, we call it indirect. Like GST or so many other taxes, which is burden is on the consumers itself. So like entry 82, I say that while the Constitution of India is important for tax, and that maybe my opinion, maybe other panels are not agree on that, that Constitution does not give power to tax. Okay, tax power is coming from the sovereign. So every government has power to tax, whether it's a Constitution only limit the power. Okay, so Indian Constitution like just limit the power to tax. It does not grant the power to tax. So power to tax is always with the sovereign. Okay, so like how it is limiting that? So like limitation is under entry 82, which grants the power to legislation that he can legislate on the income tax. So it is a tax on income except agricultural income. Or Article 265 of the Constitution, we say that no tax shall be levied or collected except by authority of law. So these are the just power to limit the taxation. It is not to grant the power to tax. So Constitution has as such a role to limit only, not to grant the power. That is one thing. Second thing is that we should know before taxation that what is taxable. So what is the subject matter of taxable? Like income tax we call it. So income tax is a tax on income. But what is income? It is not defined under the Income Tax Act. What is income? It is just inclusive definition. Says that income includes these things. So it is very clever move by the legislature that they keep it open-ended definition that okay, you can include anything as an income. There is no limitation. That is the beauty of inclusive definition. Then definition income has different facets. Okay, like whether it is a diversion of income, application of income, whether it is a passive income, whether it is an active income. So all income has, because income is the source. Basically, income is the subject, and every income has different rates also in a broader sense if you consider that. Okay, so every income has a different rates of taxation like that. So cumulatively, it is one tax, it's annual tax, but it is divided in five heads like house property, salary, house property, business, profession, capital gain, or other sources. But each heads are mutually exclusive. Salary cannot be taxable as a business. Business income cannot be taxable as a salary, though it is annual tax. So each heads are mutually exclusive to each other, and we have to take care the what income is that, whether it is income from salary or house property. Like you are a member of parliament, you receive salary, but your income is not taxable as a salary. Your income is income from other sources because you are not a professional as well. Politics is not a profession. So whether it is a house property or business income, there are so many judgments of the Supreme Court or relevant high courts on that whether it's a house property income or business income. Then there are problem between business income and capital gain, that whether it is a income from business or a capital gain. So first we have to decide that whether income is taxable or not. Second is that under which category that income is taxable. So first, what is income? Then whether that is taxable or not. And the third, that what category of income is suitable for that. What head of income will be suitable for that taxability. And then the another aspect will be that who is taxable. So is not everyone is taxable. Who is taxable means there is a person who are taxable under the Income Tax Act. So who is a person? Now person again inclusive definition like income. So it defines that what persons are taxable, and because it's inclusive definition, you can include everyone in that category. There is a company or firm or LLP or trust or everyone. But even that is also very important, that whether as a person you are taxable or not. And then when it is taxable, that is also very important. So when it is taxable means what is previous year, what is assessment year, what are those financial years. So everything. So this for what, like why tax, what is taxable, and who is taxable, when is taxable. Everyone should learn that how this tax is going on like that. Now you see if you look into the basics of income tax, I'm not going into details of that. The another topic I want to discuss in that what is I'm like suppose entry 82 is there. I discussed the entry 82 that is provide the power to the legislatures. Now you see under union list under the central government. Now entry 82 we have crossed the powers of entry 82 in so many aspects. Like entry 82 says that income is taxed on income itself except agriculture income, but even agriculture income is taxable, not directly or indirectly, it is taxable. In a different way, it is taxable, and the court has already, and there are constitutional commission, that is the law commission 49th report, and they have already upheld the validity of the agricultural income tax. So it is not said that agricultural income is not taxable. So it is under entry 82 itself. But how you can tax? You see, there are so many like security transaction tax are there. Fringe benefit tax was there earlier. Now it is abolished in 2009. Now fringe benefit tax was on transaction. It was not on income. But Supreme Court said that no, even that is also indirect income, so it is taxable. So if something which is not, you see, finding place under entry 82, they bring entry 97, that is the residuary entry, and that they try to place that taxation regime under 97. So there are so many taxes, like wealth tax is still 97. There is no entry for the wealth tax. So even so many taxes are there under 97. Even like digital taxation or equalization levy, even also they are putting the equalization levy under 97 because it is not on income, it is on the basically transaction itself. Okay, so there are so many aspects of that entry 82. I am not going into the details of that itself. Now, if you the second issue which has been given to me for a discussion on that is that how the new tax regime or old tax, I think it's also part of that new tax regime and old tax regime and the benefit of that. So it's very subjective whether the new is beneficial to you or old is beneficial to you. It's very subjective to the person itself and their capacity and their income, that what kind of source he has, what kind of income, what kind of expenditures he has. So you see, there is one new section has been inserted by the Amendment Act of 2020, that is section 115 DST, and it provides the tax rate in that, and they basically divided the income in different 5-6 tax rates. Like it started from 5%, next is 10%, then 15, then 20, then 25, and then last is 30. So 30 is coming after 15 lakhs, and between 2.5 to 15 lakhs, there are 5 different other tax rates are there, 5% to 25%. So it depends on that how it is beneficial to that. Uh, like suppose I can give you the merits or demerits benefits also of the new or old tax regime. What are the benefit of new tax regime? Like suppose investors may not prefer to lock in their funds in particular things. Like suppose if you want to claim the benefit, you have to go to the 80C deductions. Okay, so you have to make a term deposit like that. You have to invest in this equity-linked mutual fund only, or you have to do this thing. So there are conditions attached to that. So no, maybe investors are not ready to lock their funds. So if they have open-minded and they have other options, they can go ahead on that. It also increases liquidity. So if you are suppose a new employee and you need more money for your household expenditures, so it will increase the liquidity. It will give more cash in hand to you, so you can have the expenditure on different other things. It also gives the flexibility and customizing their investment. Like suppose I want to do a mutual fund in an SIP. Okay, I don't want to make an LIC. I don't want to invest equity link. I may want to make the debt fund. Okay, so it gives flexibility and I can customize my investment. But what are the you see the demerits? Demerits are there that of course non-availability of deductions which are allowed in different rates of income tax. It also like you can say the old income tax regime was by enforcing investment. So they are enforcing the investment. Okay, so they make the person more saving oriented. At least even this way, the persons are saving the money. Okay, and because of that saving oriented person only, we have saved from this subprime crisis in 2008, because and if you see the gross saving rate was approximately 30% in March 2019, and in that domestic saving was playing very important role. So out of 30% of the gross saving rate, the domestic saving was very important. And domestic saving, you see the tax savings are playing very important role in domestic savings. So that is also significant that, okay, of course, you are forcing, because in India, you know that without force, no one want to work. So you are forcing the person to invest money and to save that money, and by that way. Another thing is that, like, suppose you have the house loan. Of course, you can't shift to the new regime because there is no deductions. Yeah, you see, all deductions of your allowances under salary, all deduction to a business and professionals on daily expenditures has been taken by house loans, like that section 24 deduction has been taken. Then all chapter 6 deductions like 80 and 80 deduction, all deductions has been taken except 80CCD, which is the NPS, and some other deductions. Okay, so you have to basically plan, you have to make an individual plan that what is more beneficial to you. Okay, you need money or you don't need money, like that, and then it is you have to customize your things. So it is very individual, it is very individualistic, it is very subjective to the person. Okay, you can't say that old is good or new is good. Maybe for me new is good, for you it is old is good, or for me old is good, for you it's a new is good. So it depends on that person to person and how they are planning their investment and how they are planning their expenditures. So there is no such, I just discussed about that pros and cons on that. Now the very important aspect of this COVID situation, and then this now everything is online. Okay, now we are everyone want to shift their business online. So what are the relevance of this online business and how we are going ahead? You see, there is so many problem under the e-commerce taxation, and since beginning it is there, problem is there, still that problem is persisting because no one is agree on that itself on so many aspects. Now the problem is source versus residence. Okay, now that source versus residence, that all capital import country want different thing, all capital export countries want different things. Okay, so like capital export country or capital import country, have their own problem, their own prospect itself. Like just I'll give you example of that Google tax or this equalization levy, which was just imposed in 2020, 2% in addition to whatever earlier we had in 2016. This 2% tax on these services and the sale of this service or sale of the goods itself on so many other companies. Now US has started investigation under their trade department investigation, and they want to put a sanction on so many countries, that how you can you are just biased towards the US, and you can't have this kind of tax on Facebook or Google or so many other companies. Okay, so and they try to even withdraw from the OECD on that aspect, that no, we don't want to be part of that OECD discussion on the BEPS, on the action plans. And at the time of beginning of the, they are agree on the so many action plans like the digital economies, digital taxes action plan 1, and they are agree on that. But now if the government has started levying taxes on these online platforms, they are saying that no, you are biased towards America, you towards US, so we don't want to put, we have started investigation against this country and will put sanction on this. So that is the problem itself. You see, like so many, one of the, you see, important principle of taxation, like Adam Smith has provided so many different taxation like ability to pay and benefit approach and all that. But right now, what is more important principle is international compatibility of your law. Okay, so whether your law is compatible to other laws or not, because you need investments in India. And you see, so many decisions of Supreme Court, like Vodafone or even Azadi Bachao Andolan. You see, Azadi Bachao Andolan is 2003 judgment where they said that no, we need investment. So even they say that no, treaty shopping is also legal. Okay, so you can avail the benefit of treaty to invest in India. But right now we have amended the Mauritius agreement, and we say that no, treaty shopping is no more legal. Now you have to adopt this limitation on benefit clause, and so many other aspects have been amended in that. So what was important in 2003 is right now not. That is because they said, no, we want to make India, we don't want to make India a tax haven country. So on digital taxation aspect, you see there are so many problems, and due to the COVID also, what is the impact on digital taxation? You see there are a lot of, like one is a very important aspect, and there's amendment also under the income tax on the resident aspect. Okay, now suppose some person is already in India before 22nd March, and he is there, and he, because of the lockdown or because of there is no flight availability, he is still in India till maybe June or maybe July, still there is no international flights. So how you calculate the number of days, because the number of days will make them resident or non-resident. So that has also been taken by the CBDT, and they have already issued the circular on that to reduce or to not consider these number of days. So another thing is that you see there is amendment in 2020 also where they have deemed residents. That person will be considered to be resident in India if they have they're not paying any tax anywhere. Now this clarification is still they are waiting for that how they are going ahead on that itself. Now the another thing is that if you look into the aspect of Google tax or what you call a digital tax, now the first committee in 2001, I think is there is a Nitish in the chairmanship of Nitish Desai. There's a committee in 2001 is called E-Powered Committee, which has submitted the report, and they have basically said that in Income Tax Act Section 9 is there to tax these companies, and we have to declare so many other, include so many other aspects in the definition of royalty and fees for technical services. But the problem is that now the committee has suggested that royalty and fees for technical services is sufficient to include even e-commerce taxation. But the problem is that in number of cases, the judiciary has taken another way and said that no, this is not royalty, this is not fees for technical services in number of cases. And another aspect that now DTAA comes in rescue. Now definition of royalty under the Income Tax Act is a very vague definition, but under the DTAA it's very limited, and that they try to put the DTAA, and of course as per Azadi Bachao, DTAA is always beneficial, so it overrides the Income Tax Act. So you can take the benefit of DTAA always. The same thing happening with fees for technical service. Now they put this make available clause in DTAA. Now there are so many technical services where there is no make available any knowledge, any technicalities or any technical experts in that. So in that case, it is also not a fees for technical services. So why this equalization levy concept came? Because of this DPS Action Plan 1. And they have suggested three ways, that is the either you go to the significant economic presence, or this nexus theory, or equalization levy. Now both nexus theory and SEP has basically connected with the business income and permanent establishment, and the jurisdictional issues are there. But in equalization levy, there is no such issue, because it is not falling under the Income Tax Act provision. It is basically under the Finance Act 2016, and it is not a tax on income also, and there is no implication on the tax treaty as well. So it is a kind of unilateral measures India has taken to put certain burden on these e-commerce taxes and e-commerce operators, are this like a Google's or other Facebook or like that, on their advertisement services, because there are so many Indian companies are putting their advertisement on these platforms, and they are earning money from that, and they are not paying taxes in India because of so many different reasons. So this equalization levy, and just I read the report today only in Economics Times, that government has collected 2,600 crores from 2016 till today, the revenue from the equalization levy. So it's a huge amount for the government in any case. And that's why they have put additional 2% right in this budget, okay, to even the Amazon or so many other companies who are selling the goods from outside India, or so many other companies. But this is a point of contention between the countries, that they don't want to make this. So Akhilesh Ranjan Committee has been constituted in 2016, and they have submitted the report to put this equalization levy under the Income Tax Act. And they have discussed even the constitutional validity as well. So they have discussed entry 82, entry 97 in that report. And they said that if entry 87, 82 is not coming in that, so under 97 we can bring equalization levy, so there is no bar on that. So even the constitutional validity has been discussed by the Akhilesh Ranjan Committee. And after the recommendation of Akhilesh Ranjan Committee only, this equalization levy was basically put in the black and white in the Finance Act 2016. And the another thing is that in 2017, even the legislature has amended the section 9, that what is meaning of business connection, and they have amended, they have inserted one sentence of the significant economic presence. Now this SEP still that is not basically in effect, that is coming in for certain provisions will come in 1st April 2022, and some provision will come in 1st April 2021, because they are waiting for this MLI multilateral conventions to come in effect, and then to apply these laws on different transactions. You see the significant economic presence, because there are so many aspects of business connection under section 9 read with the permanent establishment under DTAA, because if there is a business permanent establishment, there is a business connection. But if there is a business connection, need not to say that there is a PE also, because PE is a special term used under DTAA, and it has its own limitation. Business connection has no its limit. There is no limitation, but PE has its own limitation. So you can't include everything in the definition of PE. So this significant economic presence, like suppose and the case is already pending, I think Netflix, Vibhuti may be knowing better than me, that Netflix issue there, that how they are taxable in India, or they are not taxable in India. Now you see there are so many online platforms right now, even in the COVID situation, lockdown, person are getting this Netflix, Amazon Prime, and so many other platform, OTT. But whether they are taxable or not, because they are selling their services, they are selling their database, and they are collecting and they are using the IP address of India, so whether they are taxable or not. So this significant economic presence is going to tax these kind of companies, maybe not today, in future. And they are basically trying to bring these, because even downloading of data is going to be taxable in India. Downloading of software is going to be taxable in India under the business connection, not under the royalty. Forget about royalty, because there are so many aspects. So they want to bring business connection in that, business income in that, because business income is a active income, and you can have more taxation on that And royalty is a passive income, then they share the revenue within the country. But if it is business income, there is no sharing of revenue. It is one side taxability. So this COVID-19 situation, of course, put the effort of the government that how they want to tax these online companies or these e-commerce companies. I'm not going into such detail in the like because you see every country want to tax. Now, if you just I give you that, like Italy has the web tax. Italy has also amended the definition of PE. United Kingdom, they call diverted profit tax. They have also multinational anti-avoidance law on that. Australia has diverted profit tax. They want to add so many things in that. Like Israel, they also has amended the definition of PE to tax this e-commerce companies. The Hungary, they have advertisement tax. There are so many countries are specifically saying digital service tax or digital tax. So they are coming with this concept of digital tax, specifically or separately maybe. Okay, that we can tax these kind of companies because now you see India is the you can say the biggest market economy, and there are users, there are service providers, there are service receivers in India. So they want to exploit these market, and they can earn so much revenue from that. So I think they said they can share also some part of revenue as a tax with the government, because you know that tax is for a public purpose and no one to give up revenue, and that is the more problem. That's why I say that is all concept, all conflict of source versus source or source versus residence, or even residence versus residence, just to tackle the tax matters and just to have the more revenue from the tax. I'm open for any question, maybe at any point of time, if anyone want to ask something. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us. Sir, as you rightly mentioned that, the old income tax regime or the new income tax regime, it's a very subjective, thing it will obviously differ from individual to individual. But as you also pointed out that, don't you think that this new regime probably is going to be discouraging people to invest or probably save the money, which they were doing
That's
probably
why
earlier?
I say that, that's why I say that suppose I don't want to invest in LIC or equity linked mutual fund, but I want to invest in the debt fund. That is more returnable, or maybe I want to have the other mutual funds or through SIPs. Okay, so that kind of flexibility, that's why they said that it is optional. Okay, and being a salaried employee, you can shift easily from 1 year to year basis. Not as a businessman, not as a professional. As a salaried employee, you can shift maybe next year as an old regime, and that option has been given to salaried employee. Okay, not to the businessman, not to the professional, because as a businessman, professional, if you choose to be a new regime, then next year you can change, but not beyond that. Okay, so they have limited that scope for a businessman, but for salaried employee it is open. Every year you can change if you want to change it. Okay, but of course that kind of flexibility is required for every investor. Okay, where they want to invest. Suppose I want to invest in gold, I want to invest in the land or real estate. I can't take benefit of HEC in real estate. Okay, so if I have money, I can invest in real estate. I invest in the gold. That is
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us. Over to you, Professor Vidushi.
Thank you, Professor Arushi. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Ankit Namdev, who is currently working as the Senior Associate in Direct Tax Practice of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, Mumbai. He is a member of the Bar Council of Maharashtra and Goa and has graduated from Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, National Law University, Lucknow. Sir has an experience of over 6 years in advising clients on international taxation. He has advised clients on various issues in relation to inbound and outbound transactions, restructurings, business transfers, franchise agreements, EPC contracts, etc. He has been actively involved in presentations at national and international conferences. He has also co-conducted a discussion on advanced pricing agreements at National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, and a certificate course on MLI organized by Chamber of Tax Consultants, Mumbai. He has published various articles on international taxation with Tax Sutra, CCH Wolters Kluwer's, Bloomberg BNA. I welcome you, sir. Sir, can you help us in understanding what exactly is PM CARES Fund and what implications does it have with respect to the income tax regime?
Thank you, Professor Vidushi and Professor Arushi. for and also many thanks to Professor Manoj sir for laying out a very brief background and very sort of very vital background to the whole income tax regime, and I think that sets the platform very well for this panel discussion. And just to sort of give you a brief on the PM CARES Fund, before we deal with the exact sort of features of the fund per se, I would want to spend a minute or two on the basic sort of premise of why these funds exist. So, for example, you would have also heard about the National PM Relief Fund, which are used in cases of drought and flood and natural calamities like that. So, the reason why these specific funds or these specific event-based funds exist is to be able to cater to these calamities or the sort of uncertainty or the problems arising from these calamities. Also, it sort of creates a more sort of social objective to cater to these needs, whereby you're taking the money from the people who have it more than the more in sort of abundance, and who are able and who are in a position to contribute to the specific issue and cause. That's where these sort of funds are very relevant. Now, as Manoj sir specifically mentioned, uh, uh, there was a taxation and other laws relaxation of certain provisions ordinance, which was promulgated in March 2020. And the ordinance dealt with sort of various relaxation with vis-a-vis income tax compliances. I would not say relaxation, but extension of deadlines and sort of a more sort of viable period of time to arrange your affairs, to be able to file your tax return, to be able to make investments in the proposed mode, to be able to claim the exemption tax deductions and exemptions under section 80G and onwards. And sort of that's the whole premise of the relaxation which was provided. Of course, there were other sort of acts which were also linked to the ordinance, and the relaxation was also provided in respect of various other acts. Um, to so the PM relief PM CARES Fund, that is the PM Citizens Assistance and Relief in Emergency Situations Fund. So the CARES Fund was included in the promulgation itself, and was set up under the ordinance to be able to cater to the specific relief activities which are required to be undertaken to curb and sort of for the cure of COVID-19 in India. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the objective is to sort of promote people to make those donations and enable the government to have additional funding to take care of these issues. Now, vis-a-vis that particular objective, the ordinance provided relief under 80G for people who were making donations to the PM CARES Fund, and they were able to claim 100% deduction for the amount of donations that they had made towards this specific fund. Um, there also, to sort of give you or sort of tie in the general provisions of 80G. Generally, you have a cap of deduction on the amount of deduction that you can claim under 80G vis-a-vis the donation that you are making, which is capped at 10% of the gross total income. Now, under the PM CARES Fund, when you're specifically donating to the PM CARES Fund, that particular cap is not applicable, and you can claim as much deduction of the amount that you have specifically donated towards. Uh, there are two sort of ancillary or connected issues that I would want to just touch upon. Firstly, what we were earlier discussing, what Professor Manoj was discussing earlier, vis-a-vis the old regime and the new regime. Uh, So one would think that, if I am making investment under the if I am claiming relief under the new regime, which has a specific condition that you would not be claiming any deductions, any specified deductions, if you're going under that regime and claiming a more concessional sort of tax rate. The law has provided that clarity, and it has enabled people to continue to claim that concessional tax rate without having to let go of their ATG donation, as far as their donations to the PMKS fund are concerned. Uh, Another sort of issue that I would want to touch upon is let's say a sort of a group funding, or let's say you're working for a company where more than 50, 60 employees are there, and all of you decide to make a contribution, or the employer per se has sort of done that on behalf of the employees. Now, in a situation like that, because you would not have a specific, and also, just to sort of, I think we missed that point earlier. Generally, the whole regime about ATG and you making a specific donation is that the donee gets a certificate, which is provided by the donor, and that's generally applicable for any investment under for any donations made under the specified modes under ATG. And based on that particular receipt or particular certificate, you are able to claim sort of your tax deductions under ATG, and correspondingly claim that benefit under the return of income that you would be filing in India. Now, that particular aspect gives a rise to a small difficulty, or a practical difficulty. Let's say how where the employees have done a collective sort of, or the employer has done a collective donation to the PMKS fund, and without any sort of individual allocation. How would uh, how would that amount be calculated, and how would the benefit be accorded to? So on 9th April 2020, there was a circular that was issued by the CBDT, wherein they had dealt with various aspects with respect to the extension of the timelines and the law ordinance, and etc. So now they have added one more sort of clarification in that aspect, to say that the deduction can be claimed based on the uh, consolidated value that is reflected, provided and they have sort of further explanation to it, to say that the corresponding employee would be claiming the benefit only vis-a-vis the donation that is reflected under the Form 16 that the employer would be issuing. So even in a scenario of a collective donation being made by the employer or the employees, and then that proportionate or corresponding amount would be reflected in the particular Form 16 specific to the employee, and that's how the PMKS fund would sort of help in, or sort of would operate and give you the benefit vis-a-vis the collective fundings are concerned.
So, thank you, Ankit sir, for the insight. We would also want to know that there are a lot of reliefs which are being planned, which are being given to the people who are setting up, operating, and maintaining quarantine centers, and the taxpayers who are desirous of contributing their CSR expenditure towards the income towards this particular calamity. How are these reliefs going to impact the income tax regime in the country?
Okay, I'll take that question into two halves. Firstly, we'll deal with the CSR expenses in general. So, just to give you a brief background to the CSR regime, it was introduced by the Companies Act 2013. Prior to the introduction of the 2013 Act, CSR as a mandatory concept did not find its mention under the 1956 Act, and for the first time it was introduced by section 135 of the Companies Act. The CSR sort of obligation kicks in if you are meeting certain specified criteria. It is not applicable to each and every company. It is only applicable, let's say, if you have a net. There are three broad sort of parameter or category that you will have to see. Firstly is the net worth, where if your net worth is at least 500 crores, then you are liable to make the mandatory CSR contributions. If your turnover is at least 1,000 crores, then also you would be liable. Or if your net profit is at least 5 crores in a financial year, then you would be liable to make the mandatory CSR contributions. Now, the extent of contribution itself, of course, has also been sort of put forth in the policies formulated by the government, and the contribution is supposed to be 2% of the average net profit of last 3 years, and CSR as a regime is applicable from FY 14-15 onwards. Now, vis-a-vis, if you're making, let's say, donation, if you're making specific sort of contribution towards CSR, uh, which is then the general sort of impression or the general expectation would be that this whatever I am doing, I am complying with the law, and it's something that I should generally be able to claim a deduction for. Unlike the general expectation that would exist on this, the section 37(1) of the Income Tax Act, which is dealing with the general sort of deductions which are relatable, which are incurred uh, exclusively for the purpose of the business carried on by the taxpayer. Now, general sort of impression would be that we will be able to claim the deduction, but the proviso to section 37 specifically was sort of amended by Finance Act 2014, and it was specifically provided that CSR expenses would be deemed not to be an expenditure incurred for the purpose of the business. Um, uh, one obvious sort of question is why that is so. Is there a rationale that the government has thought through that we are not allowing any specific deductions towards this purpose, even though it is I am sort of complying with the law when I am making a CSR contribution. Uh, so I think the memorandum to the Finance Act itself had brought about this rationale, and what the government did was to clarify that look, we are going to treat any income that you have already earned and then sort of applied towards a particular purpose, that we continue to treat as an application of income, and it is not that you are incurring that income specifically towards the purpose of the expense. uh, while we can sort of agree to disagree and we can keep on debating about this should not be so, but we have to go about how the language is worded, and if the legislative intent has been clear enough, there is sort of no room for any doubt around it. But what the government also did was to not take away the specified deductions. If you are if you're making investments, or if you're contributing towards CSR, but then that is not being claimed as a general deduction under 37(1). uh, 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 let's say for an example, even for the PM CARES fund, what we were discussing earlier, what the government did is to exclude the or rather include the contributions made towards the PM CARES fund as being a CSR expense. So the other analogy or the other way round cannot work, that every CSR expense cannot be a deductible expense, but some sort of specific, if the specific relief has been claimed under a specified section, then even though it is forming part of my CSR expense, we would going to allow. And that's the sort of underlying principle to the donations that are made to the PM CARES fund as well, wherein the government is allowing you to claim that particular donation as a CSR expense, and in which case, although it is letting go of the liquidity which it otherwise would receive from the taxpayers vis-a-vis both the amounts, or at least liquidity in the market. But then, of course, at the same time, it is also promoting people to make those donations to the specified fund. Another sort of example would where you can continue to claim relief would be specified, let's say specified investments made under specified research, or if I'm making investments towards a specified institution which has been specifically approved towards the scientific research. So that is also another permitted and a specified mode of deduction that you can continue to claim. Um, and of course, the underlying objective is the government did not want to further incentivize uh, a deduction that they have already allowed for, and hence generally the CSR expenses which are not falling under the specified category of investments or specified category of mode of expenditure, the deductions are not available. Now, of course, moving on to the second leg of the question that we were dealing with, vis-a-vis the specified exemptions towards running a quarantine center. There were very much speculations about the government enabling sort of a specified tax relief to carry out the maintenance and operations of relief and relief against COVID-19 and maintenance and operation of specified quarantine centers. However, there has not been any sort of specific move towards these relief or specific clearance towards these relief. The speculations were there and continue to be still there. Of course, the government would have to come up with these clarifications at the relevant time, at the time that they deem is appropriate. Uh, uh, However, I just want to sort of run through a few provisions that would be relevant. And when we talk about quarantine centers, I would say generally there are two sort of industries that would be most impacted by it. Is the hospitality sector or the hotel industry, and the other would be the real estate sector, that the flats are lying vacant, or the builder has sort of unsold inventory, and that they can make use of these properties to run specific quarantine centers. So there is a specific sort of regime that one can consider, which is under Section 1023C, whereby based on a case-to-case basis, the commissioner exemptions can accord an exemption on a specific approval, and that is also an application-based mode rather than automatic mode. And if the institution is sort of seeking a specific approval and it's able to demonstrate with the objectives, that look, what I'm doing is towards this general, beneficial purpose and general charitable purpose, although there is a specified mechanism to claim a sort of a continuous or an infinite 12AA exemption or for charitable activities. But if, let's say, in a scenario where you're looking at only a specified period for which you will be running those charitable activities, that's something that we can consider. And also, I would also want to sort of use this opportunity to highlight that recently this provision has also been amended by the Finance Act 2020. Now, the broader sort of outline to it is that the availing these exemptions has become more difficult than ever, or the sort of whole regime has become a bit stricter because of the tax avoidances arrangements that the tax authorities would have come across. And now the exemption is for a specified period of 5 years. And also there is sort of a specific timeline within which you need to seek and apply. And the timeline is, let's say, in a case of a renewal of an application, it's the 6 months before the expiry of the period. And in case of a fresh sort of certification, it's 1 month prior to the commencement of the FY to which the activities may be pertaining to. So that's the sort of premise to the specified exemption regime under 1023C. Now, another sort of aspect that I wanted to touch upon is the weighted deduction or accelerated depreciation under 35AD, which is again very sector specific provision. You have you have a various sort of specified sectors or activities wherein this benefit can be claimed. But as far as COVID-19 is concerned, two sectors which would be very relevant is hospital and the and hotel industry. Hospital, there is a requirement to have at least 100 patients, 100 beds for patients, and for a two-star and hotels, they need to be at least at the level of two-star hotels in accordance with the government regulations. If that is so, then if let's say in a situation where a particular person is setting up a hospital or is setting up a hotel to be able to run a quarantine center, then the capital expenditure which is incurred towards setting up of the plant and machinery and or the fixed assets of these operations prior to the commencement of operation, that 100% reduction towards this uh, uh, expenditure can be claimed. And the relief is generally not allowed if you have claimed deduction, if you have claimed the same sort of expense under different head, or if you have otherwise claimed the same deductions under any other provision of the act. Uh, one sort of material aspect that we need to consider is it is applicable for fresh sort of investments or fresh setups only, and not where you have sort of come up with by way of a splitting of the existing businesses, or you have only acquired or you've just transferred the sort of plant and machinery towards this purpose, and now you are claiming that deduction. One another sort of aspect that I just want to complete, and then we can move on to the next question, is that this specified deduction is not available from AY, sorry, FY 10-11 onwards, which is, that's my personal view. Of course, it is not, I'm not talking in capacity as a senior associate of the firm I work with. But my personal view is that, these sort of existing provisions should have been enabled by the government to sort of move towards a more certain and more hand-eye coordination based sort of a scenario where the taxpayer are aware of the relief that they can claim. If the government comes up with these clarifications at a later point in time, then the people who may have sort of contemplated and made those investments, they are losing out an opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ankit sir, for such words of wisdom. One last question that I would want to ask you is that if you can just tell us a little more about how mergers and acquisitions are going to be affected by COVID-19, and also its impact on various tax disputes that we have.
Right, and that's a very valid question, Professor Vidushi. I would say that merger and acquisitions are going to have sort of a mixed bag impact as far as COVID-19 is concerned. You are going to see acquisitions where aggressive sort of strategy is being applied, and sorry, there's a lot of disturbance. Yeah, where there is where there's aggressive strategy appointed by the acquirer, and they want to continue to sort of acquire or businesses that are sort of nearing or not able to survive on their own, or smaller sort of companies and medium companies are likely to be taken over by bigger sort of firms and companies. Now, to sort of income tax, I'll just take a couple of minutes to complete this point. So, when we talk about these level of acquisitions, one thing that comes to my mind is the anti-abuse provision under Section 56(2)(10), which basically says that if you're receiving a property, which includes shares and securities as well, if you're receiving a property for less than the fair market value, and there's a specified formula to calculate the FMV. It is not purely book value driven FMV calculation. when you are doing when you are acquiring, and if you pay a price which is less than the FMB, you would be liable to pay tax on the difference between the FMB and the price that you have paid for. So that's again something that because of COVID-19, you are going to see sort of trickle down effect on various valuations on of the companies as far as the fair market value or the fair market value calculation under tax is concerned. And correspondingly, there would be sort of impact on the acquisitions that are taking place. Another sort of perspective is the is the specifically real estate sector, where you have another anti-abuse provision under Section 50C, which says that if you acquire property for less than the stamp duty value, then you will be liable to pay you'll be liable to pay the tax on the difference between the FMV and the price that you have paid for. Again, that's also something that one needs to be mindful of, and there also we are going to see various impact. One last point with respect to the transfer pricing disputes, I would say that, or rather tax disputes, I would say that uh, transfer pricing disputes are the most likely sort of arena where we are going to see a huge jump in the number of tax disputes. Although the government has moved ahead and notified COVID-19 as a force majeure event, even then, tax per se does not take into account such a sort of notification. Your contractual disputes may your contractual disputes may very well be affected by it. Um, and also with respect to the advanced pricing agreements, you may have agreed to, let's say, a specified method of calculation of arm's length, or you may have agreed on the arm's length price per se, but whether or not
Dushiji, I think somebody is muted, Ankit.
Ankit sir, please unmute yourself, and the others are
yeah,
requested to please put their mics on mute. Yes,
sorry, I'm not sure till where I was audible, but I'll just quickly
Ankit,
repeat
the transfer
the last
pricing
point.
bit that you were talking about.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was just saying that there is going to be a bump. Potentially, there is going to be an increase in the transfer pricing disputes that we'll see. Primarily because as a result of COVID-19, your arm's length price that you may have agreed for, that may not be sort of visible, or they may not be. It may not be possible to actually keep sort of making those payments. And of course, the tax authorities are going to contend the other way around about it. And also, your advance pricing agreements, if any, that also would need to see that whether in any agreement with the CBDT, if you have come across, if you have agreed towards a ALP calculation, or if you have agreed to the arm's length price itself, that also may or may not change. And again, the renegotiation, renewal of the APAs, and sort of factoring in the economic condition, because transfer pricing is very much economics driven. So factoring the economic impact of COVID-19, and that sort of consistency with the tax authorities is the arena where the disputes are likely to arise.
Thank you so much, Ankit sir, for sharing your words of wisdom with us. They've actually clarified a lot of doubts for us. So, over to you, Professor Arushi.
Thank you, Professor Vidushi. Next, we have amongst us Ms. Vibhuti Malhotra, who is a qualified advocate on record before the Supreme Court of India and is also the Senior Standing Counsel for the Central Board of Direct Taxes for representation of the Income Tax Department before the Honorable Delhi High Court. Ma'am has also represented the state of Punjab before the Honorable Supreme Court of India and other judicial fora in Delhi as the Assistant Advocate General. She is a commercial lawyer with license to practice law in India and state of New York with a focus on litigation. Other than taxation, she also represents clients in commercial arbitrations and associated legal proceedings, white collar defense under the money laundering law and foreign exchange law, as well as a transactional advisory from a corporate and tax perspective. Ma'am has completed her BBA LLB honours from National University Jodhpur in 2011 and was awarded the Gold Medal. Thereafter, she received her master's degree from UC Berkeley School of Law. I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, as we know that the last date of filing the income tax has been extended to November 30th due to COVID-19. So what does this delay is actually going to mean for the government, and how is it really going to affect the working class?
In before I start to discuss specifically COVID related and what this extension would mean for people in general, there is one very significant factor which I wish everybody to keep in their minds, which is that in our country the income tax regime is based on self-assessment. That is that every hello, am I audible? I feel like my video is stuck.
No, ma'am, you're completely audible.
Yes, all right. I think Arushi's video is stuck. But yeah, so yes, now it's fine. Yeah, so as I was saying, we are based on a self-assessment tax regime. So what is self-assessment tax regime? Manoj sir laid down the brief, like the fundamentals of income tax, the pillars on which the law stands. Ankit referred to some very high concepts of the income tax law. I will refer to the bread and butter provisions that is how the law operates, what are the mechanical provisions of it. The most significant mechanical provisions of the Income Tax Act, in my opinion, is the assessment related provisions. And how they get triggered is the filing of the return. So when I discuss the self-assessment and assessment provisions, they will effectively answer your question that what this delay will mean for the government and what will mean for the taxpayer. As I mentioned, if we are a self-assessment based regime, that is that every person is to file a declaration in the prescribed form outlining their known sources of income. There are 5 different categories. Every year attempt is made to make that form more simpler than it was the previous year, and every year the form ends up being more complicated than what it was in the previous year. But despite that, every taxpayer is required to file it. Then the other thing is that for taxpayers who have gross receipts of more than a prescribed limit, they are required to get their accounts audited also from a practicing chartered accountant and file their tax audit report, the report which is prepared by the auditor along with their return of income. This return of income is then electronically processed at CPC, which is essentially the electronic return processing center of the Government of India. It is situated in Bangalore. It's a very high-tech organization, and I have dealt with various governmental bodies in my litigation career, and CPC, perhaps if I can say so, is one of the most high-tech and very technologically driven organization. CPC is responsible for electronically processing your returns. Now, this is one very common misconception I wish to clear, and since I think most of the audience here today is comprised of the student body, is that every return which is filed under the Income Tax Act is not evaluated by an assessing officer. Possibly can't be. As currently things stand, we have about 7 crore people, 7 crore PAN cards which file income tax returns in our country. Though the number, when we consider our population, is almost insignificant, but it's a very big sum of returns to be processed. So therefore, an attempt has been made over the years to make this process as electronic and as automated as possible. Now, the ITR is electronically filed. Similarly, there is this concept of withholding taxes, or colloquially we call them TDS, which is tax deducted at source. Whereas that we're in a situation very briefly that any person who is responsible for paying you any sum of money deducts a certain part of that payment and deposits it on your behalf, on the behalf of your tax liability with the Government of India. So all those deductions are also electronically recorded in, and that person issues you a electronic confirmation of that deduction. So all of those things which are referred Form 16 and Form 26 AS. So all of this electronic data, plus banks also file annual information reports. So all of this creates an electronic data which enables CPC to electronically process returns. Now, when CPC is electronically processing returns, it checks for arithmetical corrections, whether what has been filed is arithmetically correct. It matches the filings undertaken in the ITR with the tax audit report, with the Form 26 AS. And in a lot of these cases, certain discrepancies are noted and appropriate proceedings are initiated at CPC level only. Now, this is electronic processing of returns. In the past, not too long ago, this electronic procedure was extremely preliminary and was confined to only issuing an intimation, an acknowledgement by the CPC that yes, your return has been filed. But over the years, we will see that how even this electronic processing will involve more sophisticated steps, and in fact, it has started to do so. Now, again, the other aspect of it is what we refer to as regular scrutiny, or regular assessment. That happens under Section 143(3) of the Income Tax Act, wherein I think
I'm just working on that.
I'm getting some disturbance from someone.
Yogita, so on my MCA पे उसने check करा था, we downloading document.
Yeah. Can I continue now? Yeah. So the other aspect is this is electronic processing. The second is something called regular scrutiny or regular assessment, which is assessment by an assessing officer. That is Section 143(3) of the Income Tax Act. Now, how it happens is that the electronic data which is collected by CPC, there is something called CAS, which is Computer Assisted Selection of Scrutiny Cases. Now, this is a program by which some objective criteria are fed into that, and it identifies returns which need to be evaluated by the assessing officer, and the entire scrutiny procedure has to be conducted thereon. Now, if an assessee's case, assessee could be an individual, could be a company, case is selected for scrutiny, a notice is served on him. Thereafter, the assessing officer tells him on what grounds he's scrutinizing the assessee's case, and thereafter the entire return is open before the AO to examine and to make appropriate additions under the Income Tax Act. And this is regular scrutiny, and this leads to passage of a final assessment order, which is accompanied by a notice of demand, which one is to pay within 30 days. Now, there is another aspect of assessment, which is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of assessment under the Income Tax Act, which is the reassessment provisions. Now, in an ideal scenario, you file your return for a financial year. In the assessment year, your return is assessed, and then But reassessment is a provision which enables an assessing officer to revisit history, to go back in time and open up a return of income, and to examine a return of income which was filed previously. There are some limitations on this power within the statute, and some which have been judicially imposed as to how back he can travel in time, and in what circumstances he can travel, and the duration of the travel also varies. So I'll not go extensively into that. So by intention of bringing to your notice this the self-assessment provisions, the electronic processing by CPC, the regular assessment and reassessment is that the starting point for all of these actions is the income tax return which is filed by the SSC. Therefore, if you will notice that under the ordinance, the extension is not only for filing of returns, but the extension is also for the benefit of the income tax department to undertake all these actions that I am mentioning. Like for instance, for completing regular scrutiny, there is a time limit prescribed. The ordinance has extended that time limit also. For conducting of any action, for initiating reassessment, that time limit has also been extended. Now, the question may arise that which we are here to debate is how does it assist the taxpayers of the country, and how does it assist the citizenry at large? There is obviously a very obvious administrative convenience advantage. That is that there is more time available for an individual in view of the lockdown imposed in not only an individual, any assessee of any category, to sort their affairs in order, to put their house in order and prepare their income tax return. Like I mentioned, despite best efforts of the government, the income tax return, that form ends up being fairly complicated. So therefore, you need some time to file your returns appropriately. You need underlying documents to get your accounts audited in event you're in a tax audit case. So therefore, there is an obvious administrative convenience advantage here. But unlike other developed countries, like for instance, Arushi Madam mentioned that I'm also licensed to practice in New York, so I've also studied the Internal Revenue Code of the US. So they also have a similar extension which was announced much early on by the Trump administration when in view of the coronavirus outbreak, where not only was it accompanied with an extension in filing of return, it also gave an exemption from payment of income tax and granted an extension in payment of income tax due without interest. That is to say that if your returns in our country, the government has extended the timeline for filing returns, but income tax payments which are as per milestones, so whatever payments are to be made as per milestones, payment of have not been suspended. So any belated payment will attract interest liability in our case. So as I see it, and I'm not speaking as the senior standing counsel, but as a student of tax policy for the past many years, is that the only sacrifice perhaps that the government has undertaken is that it has foregone the interest it would have earned had everything, the assessments, the regular assessments, the return filing would have been conducted on their usual times. That's the extent of revenue foregone for the government, and there is, except the administrative convenience, it would have been nicer if it was accompanied by also an exemption in making payments and making belated payments without imposition of interest.
Okay. Ma'am, we would also like to know that since a lot of people have been losing their jobs because of this COVID-19, so what kind of relief is government planning for those taxpayers who have recently lost their jobs?
RCG, every tax measure which has been announced, the finance minister along with the Minister of State did a very exhaustive press conference a few weeks ago. We all witnessed it, which part of the Honorable Prime Minister's program to pump money into the economy. We have to acknowledge few hard facts about our economy. The hard facts are that we cannot be fiscally as liberal as developed countries can be. We have genuine deficit concerns. We cannot, deficit financing is an alternate available to us where the government can merely print more currency, but that should never be the first option. And the government should do its best to sustain demand. And with this intention, they announced a series of measures which include issuance of refunds, quick issuance of refunds, that whatever. So suppose in case of individual assessees who are individuals and who are likely to get a refund from the income tax department for any return filed previously, up to 5 lakh rupees were released immediately, and a series of taxpayers benefited from that. The rate of interest on delayed payments of TDS and TCS was reduced marginally. Then there has also been a reduction in the withholding rates prescribed under the Income Tax Act. Effectively, though, one may argue that reduction in withholding rates will not serve any larger picture when you see it in the context of the larger picture, because it only reduces immediate liability, while the primary liability of the taxpayer to render the entire tax rate still stands. But however, that does affect working capital positively. But as regards individuals who are likely to face immediate financial hardship on account of coronavirus, there is no immediate relief which has come from the government. As Manoj sir also pointed out, that the way how our income tax statute has been drafted, it's you get deductions only in certain situations and circumstances, like Manoj sir mentioned, that making certain category of investments, like how Ankit mentioned, making certain category of donations, or if you are a certain kind of business, you can avail of certain business related expenditure. So but that way there is no provision in the Income Tax Act which will enable a reduction in ultimate tax liability on account of personal living expenditure. That really doesn't exist. But the other that really doesn't exist in our situations. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your views and explaining us the nitty-gritties. Ma'am, we do have some questions from our audience over here. Mr. Rohit Mishra, he has a question that what about the benefit of interest payment on loan due to loan moratorium, and can this be claimed in the upcoming periods?
Should I answer this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what is this question exactly? Like what that right now currently?
Yes, he's asking about the benefit of the interest payment on the loan due to the loan moratorium. So he's saying, can we claim this in the upcoming time periods?
When eventually subsequently, if it is in the purpose, is if that moratoriums, now the issue is that if that loan is a business loan and you are being assessed as a business, then it will be a business expenditure and then deductible. But in case of individual assessees, there is no such deduction.
Okay, okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, your general living, a lot of countries, for example, world over, provide for this, but unfortunately, our act does not provide for like general living expenses any deduction for individuals as such. And in fact, one thing I wish to share with the audience, but I somehow missed it, is there was a report which was very troublesome, which was circulating very early on when during lockdown 1, was this report which was allegedly prepared by an association of IRS officers, which recommended raising the personal income tax rate to an astronomical level, nearly almost 40% for right now. Also, it is 42% if you make more than 1 crore a year effectively, but raising income tax rate to an astronomical level of 40%, reintroducing estate duty back again, which is in event of inheritance, on the basis of whatever is the value of the inheritance, the government estate duty exists in other jurisdictions like the United States also. It did in India in the early 80s also. So reintroducing those measures. In fact, if one was to go by what was stated in that report, individuals were going, the things were seeming very, very large, very, very gloomy for individual taxpayers of this country. That being because in a situation where nearly everyone is facing financial issues, if the government takes measures to enhance tax rates in the country, it's not likely to be received very well. However, it caused a lot of panic. So when this report was released, which was allegedly prepared by an IRS association, it caused a lot of panic in the market. It caused a lot of panic in the taxpayers. But the CBDT quickly and I think promptly disclaimed the contents of this report, and they said that this is just somebody's personal opinion and does not represent government policy in this regard. In fact, perhaps I think it will be a good time for the good occasion for the government to work on increasing tax compliance, bringing in more people within the tax net instead of increasing taxes. It should be a situation where our base is enhanced, that perhaps the social responsibility aspect of filing your taxes or of being a taxpayer citizen should be perhaps highlighted rather than increasing the rate of taxes on those who are already covered within the tax net. This was one, and another I think one very welcome thing which this government has done is that the Vivad Se Vishwas scheme. This is essentially a dispute resolution mechanism it's a part of the litigation management policy of the Government of India, wherein if you have a disputed tax amount, you can deposit a certain percentage thereof by a certain date, and then you get an exemption from exemption from interest and penalty, and your tax demand is also set aside without having going to the whole judicial process and the different level of appellate mechanisms. So this scheme was due to expire within during the coronavirus outbreak, but that the timeline for that scheme has also been extended. So I think government is taking steps in the right direction, but but whenever we judge their actions, we have to also be conscious of the limitations that they have in terms of the deficit, the FRBM, the deficit parameters which are applicable on them. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, ma'am. Ma'am, we have one more question for you. It's from Ritika Dhingra. She says that could you please suggest which is a better tax regime for salaried employees, the earlier one or the one that has been permitted as a choice this year?
I think Ankit should answer this.
Ankit, sir, please.
I think this is very, very subjective as to which regime should one opt for. Of course, there are inherent sort of pros and cons to opting to be taxed under the old regime versus the new regime. But based on my personal sort of view, I think beyond a point in time, it's only the old regime that would be sort of beneficial to a taxpayer. However, only let's say in a scenario where the salaried income is coming to close to 6 to 7 lakhs, there could be sort of a more beneficial, the new regime could prove to be more beneficial to you. But of course, based on your own set of facts, what deductions are you claiming and what deductions would you have to let go? So you would have to assess that.
That's true. Okay, thank you so much, sir. We have one more question from one of the participants, which says that, what is the idea of giving financial relief to individuals basis the income tax payment exemptions for the current financial year? Is it really institutionally possible? So I think if we can start with Manoj, sir.
So your mic is muted.
Can you repeat your question, Arushi?
Yes, sir. So there is a question from one of the participants. So he is asking basically that what kind of financial reliefs can be given to the individual for the income tax payment exemptions for the current financial year. So is it really institutionally possible to give individual reliefs to the taxpayers?
Individual relief to the taxpayer, of course, they can provide if you're like under the old regime, if you try to make more deduction under Section 80, 80C also. And maybe if you are a salaried employee, they can provide you more standard deductions. Okay, like a standard deduction, like right now it's 50,000. They can make it like okay 75,000 or 1 lakh. Depends on that. Because there are so many expenditures you are incurring for so many different type of your households. So that kind of you see for an individual ATC are more beneficial. So if they can provide some deduction under ATC or maybe under the household section 24 deduction on the house loan, they can increase. So there are limited provision under the Income Tax Act where the government can increase your exemptions or deductions to the individuals. Okay. And even if you're being an individual, you are running a business, of course, there are more business expenditure they can provide under the Section 37, which is general expenditure. And maybe under Section 36, like someone has asked about the interest on the loan. Like take suppose as a company have to distribute the salary to their employees. But right because of the lockdown, they are not earning the profits. They don't have profits maybe, so they can't distribute the salary. So suppose a company took the loan from the bank and they distribute the salary to the employee, can they claim any deduction under Section 36(1)(3)? That because in the name of commercial expediency, because Supreme Court has allowed this kind of you see transactions in the name of commercial expediency, that it is need of the time. So whether that kind of expenditure can be claimed by them, it is of course up to the government to decide whether they are allowed this kind of expenditure in the name of commercial expediency or not. So there are so many aspects, like for a individual as a salaried employee, there are different provision. For individual as a business, as a professional, there are different provisions to be applied. So there are so many provisions under that they can claim the exemptions and deductions. But of course, the government has to decide on that, as whether they want to provide that expenditures or deductions or not.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So I think we'll take one last question. So the question is that if an assessee has not declared all his investments to his employer and those deductions are not appearing in his Form 16, can the assessee claim those deductions in his return in the current assessment year of 2021? Sir, if you could answer that.
Yeah, Arushi, yeah, can you repeat? I didn't hear your question.
Sir, the question was that if an assessee has not declared all his investments to his employer and those deductions are not appearing in his Form 16, so can the assessee claim those deductions in his return in the current assessment year of 2021?
You see, now normally if you are a salaried employee, of course, it is your obligation to show your all investment to the employer, because even that required for TDS. So if employer has to deduct TDS, they should know that what kind of investments you have, and accordingly they can make a fixed percentage of the TDS. So if you have not declared any investment and now you want to claim it under that, then of course you can claim it, but there's a tedious job. You see, because maybe you have to show that maybe the evidences and everything, they can took your assessment for scrutiny. Normally your assessment is self-assessment, as Vibhuti said. But if this kind of situation, they can take your assessment on scrutiny, and then you have to submit the evidence. You have to submit so many documents. So that will be tedious for you. So it's easy to give that evidence to the employer, and they deduct TDS, and then you are at rest basically. Otherwise, you can claim, but it will be maybe subject to scrutiny assessment, because they will have a doubt on that whether right now you want to claim any investments.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Ankit, sir, I have one last question for you. So, sir, we have been seeing that, a lot of industries are, demanding relief from the government, whether it's the hotel industry or, whether it's the other sectors, they are demanding relief from the government. So, how far do you think that the government can provide them relief, and do you think it will put a burden on the taxpayers, the current taxpayers who are there?
So I would say, there are sort of very wide category of reliefs that the government can actually provide for. It doesn't necessarily have to be a monetary relief that is provided for. Firstly, also, when you talk about the hospitality sector or the real estate sector, uh, for example, to tie up with the income tax perspective, let's say if we sort of provide them with further extension of the period for which we generally allow the unsold inventory, because there is a deemed rental provision which is applicable to the unsold inventory of the builders. So if it would only be a deferral of time for 1 year or so, but that's something that also we can consider. I mean, already it was extended last year, but again, in light of COVID, how far that extension can be sort of applied for is something that the government has to consider. Another sort of area would be the tolerance range that is provided for as regards the calculation of FMV for immovable property. So what we discussed earlier with respect to 50C. Now there also the government initially the tolerance was permitted for a value of 5% from the FMV, but that was extended to 10%. But in light of COVID now, generally based on industry reports, you would notice that the sort of shortfall in the prices is coming to at least 20 to 30% is the general sort of estimates that are provided for, at least for the uh, buildings in the metro cities of Mumbai, Delhi, NCR, etc. So there also, that tolerance, if we could look at a potential value of 20% or 15%, maybe for a limited period of time for 2 years or so, that would be really helpful to the sector in general.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Over to you, Professor Vidushi.
Thank you so much, all of you, for this beautiful session that we had. And I would now want to invite Professor Dr. Kanupriya, Dean, School of Law, to propose a vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Professor Arushi. Thank you, Professor Arushi, for holding such a wonderful session today. It's really very amazing to see the interest of all the participants, and certainly the topic is very much relevant in the present scenario. It has not only shaken the Indian economy, but I would say the global economy. And under these circumstances, how the government can assist the citizens, and how a helping hand can be lended by the government to people in order to help them, sail through these difficult times. Because it's not easy for everybody. In the starting, we have heard that that the government imposed restrictions on layoff of the people, but ultimately, again, the same thing happened. So tax regime is something which directly or indirectly affects everybody. So whether it be service tax or the corporate tax or any other advanced tax, or tax relating to your organization, it is certainly putting another financial pressure on the people. So thank you very much, Manoj sir, for highlighting the role of the present tax regime. Thanks, Ankit and Vibhuti, for taking up all the practical aspects. So I'm indeed very thankful to all the speakers out there, all the panelists today. So I hope we have been able to give a good knowledge base, as well as a great deal of information to our attendees. Thank you so much. Thanks once again thank you, Ansel University, for giving us this platform for organizing these webinars and interacting with the people. So this is one media wherein we can, exchange our thoughts and probably give suggestions for the reformation of the existing systems. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time and efforts that you took to be here. And we know that everybody is very busy these days because of work from home, but still you could find out time from your busy schedules and be a part of this webinar. Thank you so much, all of you. And I, Professor Vidushi Puri, would like to thank all the participants also to be because they found out the time to be here. And feedback form has been shared in the chat box, so please fill in before you leave, and your certificates will be mailed to you soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.